What if I told you the ancient Greeks built skyscraper-sized temples without a single crane, bulldozer, or drop of cement? Stones heavier than tanks, lifted by hand. Structures so precise, they've survived for over 2,000 years. This isn't mythology, it's real ancient engineering. And today, we're uncovering the forgotten secrets behind the construction of the greatest temples in human history. To the Greeks, temples were not just places of worship. A temple was considered the very home of the god it honored. Inside, a statue of the deity sat, often surrounded by offerings and treasures. Temples hosted rituals, sacrifices, hymns, and public feasts. They weren't merely religious centers, they were political symbols, cultural landmarks, and civic pride. But they didn't always look this grand. The first Greek temples were humble: mud brick walls, thatched roofs, wooden beams. It wasn't until the 7th century BC, likely inspired by Egyptian stone construction, that the Greeks transitioned to monumental stone temples. And from there, temple architecture evolved into a highly refined and standardized form that would last for centuries. A typical Greek temple featured a peristyle, a series of columns running along all 4 sides. Behind them stood the cella, the sacred chamber where the god's statue was kept. The structure was capped with a gabled roof, supported by wooden trusses and covered with terracotta tiles. Greek temples were built in one of 3 architectural styles, or orders. The Doric order, used in mainland Greece and colonies in Sicily and Italy, was sturdy and plain, with thick columns and simple capitals. The Ionic order, common in the Aegean and Asia Minor, featured slender columns and elegant spiral-shaped capitals. The more decorative Corinthian order emerged later, gaining popularity during Roman times. Unlike modern private construction, temples were civic projects. They were built by the polis, the city-state, and overseen by committees appointed by the local government. An architect was hired early on to provide a detailed plan, after which the work was divided among contractors, artisans, and laborers. Both free men and slaves contributed to the work, from stonecutters and sculptors to haulers and builders. In some cases, temple construction was driven by political ambition. In the Archaic period, ambitious rulers known as tyrants would sponsor grand temples to showcase their power and gain public favor. With total control over resources, they could build faster than democratic governments. However, if they were overthrown, their projects often remained unfinished, abandoned by the new regimes. Several factors determined how fast a temple could be completed: the size of the temple, the available workforce, the political stability of the city, and the technology of the time. As temples grew larger, so did the complexity of their construction. The Parthenon, built during the height of the Athenian Empire, used over 50,000 cubic feet of marble and took 9 years to complete, and that was considered fast. By the end of the 6th century BC, cranes and compound pulleys began to appear. Though basic, they revolutionized construction by allowing smaller teams to lift heavier blocks with more precision. However, even with this advancement, the maximum load they could bear was limited, which affected the size of the stones used. These tools didn't eliminate effort, they only made it slightly easier. Before any stone was laid, the temple's location was carefully selected. Temples were usually built in high or central locations, sometimes tied to mythological significance. At the Erechtheion in Athens, a hole was left in the floor to reveal a fissure, believed to be the mark left by Poseidon's trident. Most temples were aligned to face east, so that the rising sun could pour into the sanctuary during rituals. Transporting stone was one of the hardest parts of the process. Because moving heavy material overland was slow and expensive, builders tried to source stone as close to the site as possible. Quarries were typically local. Workers used iron picks to carve blocks and wooden or metal wedges to lift them out. Stones were shaped roughly at the quarry to lighten the load for transport, then refined on site. Construction often began in the summer, when the roads were dry and oxen were available. After laying the foundations, workers focused on the columns, Unlike Roman architecture, where entire columns were carved from single blocks, Greek columns were made from stacked drums. These drums were aligned and connected using dowels and ropes. Initially, ramps made of dirt were used to move drums into place. Later, with the introduction of cranes and derricks, stones could be hoisted with ropes threaded through carved channels or around projecting bosses. Smaller blocks needed only simple lifting tools, but massive stones, like those at Didyma, required synchronized cranes to move. Interestingly, the Greeks never used mortar. Instead, precision-cut stones were placed atop each other and held in position by their own weight. In time, metal dowels and clamps were introduced to stabilize the structure. These were often made of bronze or iron, sealed with lead. In some cases, builders used wood, particularly when metal was expensive or unavailable. Timber, especially for the roof, posed a serious challenge. Greece lacked large trees, so builders had to import beams from places like Crete. Because timber was so scarce, some of the largest temples were intentionally left open to the sky, exposing the central sanctuary. Once the structural work was complete, finishing touches began. Exterior surfaces were smoothened with chisels. Columns were fluted to create a rhythmic, decorative appearance. Marble was polished to a sheen, limestone covered in stucco. Temples weren't the white ruins we see today. They were once drenched in color. Vibrant reds, blues, and blacks adorned the columns, pediments, and reliefs. Sculptures in the pediments and friezes were often painted too, giving the entire structure a dramatic and colorful life. Finally, the heart of the temple was placed, the statue of the god. These ranged from simple wooden figures to massive gold and ivory masterpieces. The statue of Athena in the Parthenon and Zeus at Olympia are two of the most famous examples. These sculptures weren't just decorative, they were the embodiment of the god, the very reason for the temple's existence. But all this came at a steep cost. Construction was expensive, sometimes astronomically so. Just fluting a single column at Didyma cost 4,500 drachmas, enough to support a family for more than 2 decades. Building an entire temple required thousands of labor hours and the wealth of an entire city. The Parthenon is estimated to have cost around 500 talents, about the annual revenue of the Athenian Empire. Cities often funded temples using public money, wealthy citizens' donations, or in some cases, foreign support. During the Hellenistic era, rulers like Alexander the Great offered financial aid to complete sacred projects. Even with help, most temples were built in stages. Construction could pause for years or even decades, often depending on war, politics, or economics. And that's the incredible story of how the ancient Greeks built their monumental temples with nothing but skill, vision, and sheer determination. If you found this video fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a journey into the past. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.